Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Chiara Sigere, the OBCT Programs Director, and I'm very pleased to introduce this webinar on behalf of the Media Freedom Rapid Response. Today is the 3rd of May, World Press Freedom Day, which was proclaimed by the UN General Assembly in December 1993, following the recommendation of the UNESCO General Conference. In these 3 decades, this day has been observed. The issues surrounding media freedom have remained as relevant as the day it was first announced. This year's theme was announced as Journalism Under Digital Siege by the UNESCO, and today, as the Media Freedom Rapid Response Consortium, we have prepared a special webinar to address this topic under the title of Journalism Under Surveillance. Last 10 March, the European Parliament, in plenary session in Strasbourg, decided to set up a commission of inquiry with the aim of clarifying the use within European borders of the Pegasus spyware and other surveillance software used to spy hundreds of politicians, lawyers, activists, and many journalists around the world. In fact, since the MFRR has been commenced, there have been at least 20 reported cases of journalists being targeted with surveillance tools in Europe. Last year, there were 13 cases, and already since the beginning of this year, there were reported 3 cases. Recently, in Greece, it was revealed that investigative journalist Thanasis Koukakis was the target of surveillance, and his devices were being monitored without his consent and knowledge. He's joining us today to answer the questions about these revelations, and the interview will be conducted by OBCT's Dimitri Bettoni. Afterwards, the MFRR coordinator Gürkan Özturan will be moderating a panel discussion on the topic of surveillance, journalism, and digital security for journalists. He will be joined by Electronic Frontier Foundation's Director of Cybersecurity, Eva Galperin, and Amnesty International Security Lab technologist Etienne Meunier.
Hello, everyone, and thanks to Thanasis Koukakis for being here with us for the World Press Freedom Day. Today we are going to talk about his case and how Thanasis found out to be under surveillance and monitored by unknown subjects, and how that experience has changed both his private life and his professional one. And we will have also a brief chat about what is possible to do on behalf of civil organizations, academia, and other organizations to provide help and support to journalists. So, Thanasis, thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you, Dimitri, for having me in such an important day.
My first question is pretty straightforward. Can you tell us what happened and how did you realize that you were being monitored?
Okay, so 2 years ago, I found out that my own government had put me under surveillance for reasons of national security. That occurs at 2020. This year, 2022, I found out that I had been targeted again, this time by an advanced technology spyware. And I became the first confirmed European national whose mobile phone was infected by Predator, a spyware system developed by Cytrox, an Israeli firm based in North Macedonia. I don't know yet who gave the second order for my surveillance. I know, but I know the first. That was the Greek National Security Agency.
How did you realize that you were monitored? Like, it started with your phone behaving strangely or something else?
Yes, let's clarify that within a period of 14 months between June 2020 and September 2021, I was monitored twice with 2 different systems. The first time, my mobile phone had some problems, meaning that the battery was over fatigued very rapidly. My telephone line didn't ring as I used to, and my Viber application had a make of its own, meaning that some modules have been activated by its own. So all those things was strange. And that's why I used my journalistic sources in order to cross-check if I was under surveillance or not. So after a period of 2 weeks, a source of mine confirmed that I was under surveillance. This was the first time during the summer of 2020. The second time, my second surveillance during the summer of 2021, I have to be honest with you, this was a very sophisticated espionage system, and I didn't had opportunity. I didn't find out by myself that I was tapped with the Predator. It took about 6 months in order to cross-check it through the help of the Toronto University Citizen Lab. And that had happened randomly, meaning that it was late December of 2021 when the Citizen Lab and Meta published at the same day 2 reports that revealed the existence of Predator. In the Meta report, the Meta reports had made a specific reference to Greek news portals that I have a collaboration with. That I found that strange and occurred. And so I decided to get in touch with Meta, with the compliance team, and I get in touch with them at the beginning of January, and they provide me a lot of help. And they were the ones that they finally get in touch. The one that they provide me access to Citizen Lab. With which I started a 6 weeks procedure, which concludes to the trace of Predator. That it was in the mid-March of 2022. So the Citizen Lab team, it was the one that discovered and confirmed that my mobile phone had been infected with Predator. This infection was during the period of July of 2021 and September 2021. They documented the way that had been infected through a text SMS, in a regular SMS, which have a link inside. Unfortunately, I was curious and I opened the link, and that's how I had been infected. So the Citizen Lab report, it had been given to me at 28th of March of 2022. And when I received it, I filed a complaint to the Greek Competent Authority for the communication security and privacy. And after that, the case went public, meaning my second surveillance.
Thanks, Thanasis. I would like to dig a bit in how this experience, well, 2 experiences, changed your way of approaching digital security. How did you change your daily routine in terms of protecting your work, yourself, your communications, but also how those experiences have impacted your personal life?
Yes, there has been a lot of turbulence, especially after my second surveillance have been documented. Why? My case get published because of 2 specific stories. The one had been produced by the journalistic team of Inside Story, and the second from the Reporters United. And I would like to thank both of those journalistic teams for their work and the way they documented my surveillance. The second the second surveillance by the predator, it was the one that had been the story for my second surveillance through predator. It was the one that had been published first, and that gave the incentive to the Reporters United journalistic team to reveal all the documents that they had for my first surveillance from the Greek National Security Agency. Why am I make this reference? As the investigation by Reporters United recently revealed, my first complaint to the Greek Competent Authority at August of 12th of August of 2020 had triggered panic in the Greek government. A few months later, in March 2021, the Greek government amended the law so that I would not longer have the right to be officially notified that my own country intelligence had been spying on me. So this ad hoc legislation hastily conjured up to hide my surveillance led to reactions inside and outside Greece, as it constitutes an abuse of power from the part of the Greek government, and what is known here in the Greek legal system as disproportionate legislation. Let me clarify that for the last 27 years, the Independent Communication Authority was able to inform people placed under official surveillance for national security reasons, provided that they have submitted a complaint and that a reasonable time had elapsed since the completion of their surveillance. But the Greek government, at the March of 2021, amended that law in order to not be in position, myself, to be informed that I have been under surveillance during the summer of 2020. So all those things had been revealed through the Reporters United story. And of course, as you understand, I was wondering why the Greek government had been decided in this way and have been legislated in this way for a common journalist, a common financial editor, who is just covering banking issues and regular financial stories. Of course, some aspects of my work have to do with the way that the governments during the years facilitated the economic crime in Greece by amending specific laws. And but it never crossed my mind that that kind of investigation journalism will conclude to my surveillance.
Yes, of course. And so do you think that your journalistic activities, which mainly focus on investigating financial crimes, including money laundering, corruption, and so on, have a direct connection to the fact that you were put under surveillance? So you see a sort of nexus, a connection between the object of your investigation and the fact that a public authority intervened by putting you under monitoring procedure.
Yes, I believe that the topics of my reporting and my investigations and the inquiries that I made about such topics that you have already referred are those that the main and the only reason that the Greek NSA have put me under surveillance. And I know that in some cases, specific cases, the Greek government was believed that the way that I report me and my colleagues specific issues were not in favor of the regime, of the Greek government, and they have made complaints through letters to editors, etc. But this is something that it is regularly for a Greek of any government to do when they believe that they have been a kind of how can I say that, a dissemination of the way that they are acting and governing. But the fact is, another thing is to respond to the criticism of a journalist and to respond to the arguments that documents that the journalism brings on. And this another thing to be hidden through the national security in order to put someone under surveillance and try to learn what he is doing, which is his sources, and if he had some secrets that they might not be known to you. So this is disproportionate, as we said earlier, and I believe that the Greek government must give some explanations on this.
Okay, last question for you is, how did you change your way of working? Like, you will keep going and investigate on these financial crimes and issues, but did your experience somehow change your way of your daily routine in a professional sense? How do you protect your communications and your sources? Did you also receive a sort of backlash in terms of relationship with your sources?
Many of my sources have been worried about it, okay? And yes, I have to be honest with you. I turned to VPN systems that they are sophisticated in order to secure my communications. I'm very cautious even when I'm getting out of my house. I don't know, this situation produces a lot of insecurity, and you for a period of time you have this feeling that you are under surveillance still. So, Dimitri, I have to be clear with you. The way that I'm doing journalism, the way that I'm acting, the way that I am writing, it is the same. It is the same. I am more cautious when it has to do with my sources. And of course, right now, I'm in position that my sources are, from their part, they are cautious when they are talking with me in the way that what they are saying. So many things have to be through interaction and the physical way, not through communications that have to do with the regular telephone lines or voice IP applications.
Thanasis, one last question. So you received practical and technical support from both the Citizen Lab and Meta, as you described to us. Also, the MFRR consortium is supporting your request of a quick and thorough investigation in your case on behalf of the Greek authorities through a statement. What is the importance of such a support that you received in recent weeks, and what can be done beyond that?
Thank you very much for your support. I have to be vocal about it, that it is precious. The Greek media, the foreign media, all the news agencies have provided a lot of support and help. They published my case, the case of my two surveillances. They have put a lot of pressure to the Greek government. Of course, especially in the case of my second surveillance through Predator, the help that have been provided by Meta and of course by Citizen Lab and Bill Mazak, who is the head of the team of Citizen Lab that traced and confirmed the existence of Predator in my mobile phone. It is, I have to say that I really owe them a lot, because they provide me their help. promptly and in a way that they made me feel secure. And this was very important for me. The way that they approached me in a way that they, for the first time, they gave me the impression that they are there to help. And this was something that had, when you give someone your phone in order to to make a whole inquiry on it, they must be a kind of trust. Okay, the Citizen Lab is an organization that gives you that kind of impression, and it is a trust, wealth trust organization.
Thank you so much, Thanasis, for telling us your story, and I'm sure we will be in touch and we will continue to cover your story and support you in your demand of a quick and throughout investigation and just your achievement. Thanks a lot.
Dimitri, thank you again for having me, and thank you for your support and for watching from close this my adventure. Thank you.
Thanks.
As part of the activities organized around the World Press Freedom Day, this year globally, we are focusing on journalism under surveillance. And as part of this global theme, today we have brought together a panel including two experts who will share with us their expertise, information, and opinion on surveillance and its impact on media freedom. Electronic Frontier Foundation's Director of Cybersecurity, Eva Galperin's work primarily focuses on providing privacy and security for vulnerable populations. By combining her background in political science and technical capacity, Eva has been involved in organizing EFF's Tor Relay Challenge, writing privacy and security training materials, including surveillance self-defense, and the Digital First Aid Kit, as well as publishing research on malware in Syria, Vietnam, Lebanon, and Kazakhstan. Since 2018, Eva has worked on addressing the digital privacy and security needs of survivors or domestic abuse. And finally, Eva is also a co-founder of the Coalition Against Stalkerware. And my second guest is Amnesty International's Etienne Meinier, who works as part of the technology program as technologist on analyzing digital surveillance of human rights defenders. And Etienne is a research fellow at the Citizen Lab, as well as a member of Nothing to Hide. Etienne is an activist, a security analyst, and researcher, and today he's going to explain to us the surveillance technologies that have been used against journalists. Eva and Etienne, welcome both.
Hi.
Thanks for having me.
So in the past year, there has been an increase in the reported cases of journalists under surveillance. And this has resonated globally, and media freedom organizations especially have named concern regarding this development. Etienne, I would like to ask you first, what are the digital threats targeting journalists today?
I mean, today's journalists are facing a lot of different digital threats, and that can go from harassment online to a lot of different forms of surveillance. What is clear that the more we go online, especially with the pandemic, and the more we use internet, different form of communication, the more we are facing these threats. And it's completely right that we have now more and more cases reported of surveillance against journalists, especially targeted surveillance. So we call targeted surveillance everything that goes from phishing to different forms of spyware. And that is likely because there have been a huge increase in the tools available for a lot of government to repress journalists. And through the research done by different organizations over the past years, we now have a more solid view of how these tools have been abused by many governments over the world. And in many cases, this has had very dramatic consequences for journalists. I mean, we have seen this form of surveillance used in countries such as Mexico or India, where there is a lot of repression against journalists, and that go from digital repression to really physical and legal repressions. And so in that context, the digital threats are just one part of this form of global repression in many countries.
And how long have surveillance technologies been used against journalists and media outlets?
So it's hard to say. The first reports go back to more than 12 years now, but very likely the moment the first media started to be online, some form of repression or surveillance started to happen. The first cases of spyware attack were reported against civil society around 12 years ago, I could say. And we have seen a massive increase in the research and publication and likely over the attacks over the past 5 years, both in how widespread it is over the world, but also in the complexity and the technical complexity of these attacks.
Thank you, Etienne. My next question is for Eva. Eva, is there a need for extensive surveillance technologies? What is the purpose of surveillance?
Well, I'm not sure I'm the right person to be defending surveillance of journalists and activists. Governments do have sort of surveillance apparatus, theoretically for intelligence gathering and law enforcement purposes. But it is not unusual for governments to also use this surveillance to violate the human rights of journalists and activists, specifically people who are interested in uncovering corruption or whose interests are opposed to the interests of either the state or the ruling class. People use the tremendous power of the government in order to spy on their enemies. And in order to do so, they buy expensive products from abroad that enable them to do so easily.
And recently, Pegasus and Predator have come to be known more commonly. They have been resonating in the news, and we have received information that multiple journalists over the last few months have been taken under government surveillance in their countries by use of these two tools. But how did surveillance technologies evolve over time?
Well, when we first started seeing surveillance software that was being targeted at journalists and activists and opposition figures, we saw relatively unsophisticated targeting. We saw targeting using email and attachments or links to fake sites that looked like YouTube, that had content that the people would be interested in. Frequently, Word documents that had been adulterated with malware and that were meant to be covertly installed on people's computers. Then we watched the entire world kind of move into the mobile space, and we started seeing very clumsy targeting in the mobile space. And then finally, we started to see people being targeted with software and vulnerabilities that did not require any kind of interaction from the user, which people find particularly scary because it feels like there's nothing that we can do about it. It's also really moved from Europe to Israel in the sense that it started out as a bunch of companies that had been based largely in Europe, such as Finfisher / Gamma International, based in Germany, and Hacking Team, based in Milan, in Italy. So European countries were building these products and selling them to authoritarian countries. And then sort of the center of gravity really moved to Israel with companies like Candiru and NSO Group. And part of the reason for that is the sort of pipeline from the IDF and Unit 8200 and the Mossad straight into the security industry in Israel, where people who had been trained in the army then go on and build security companies, which are largely funded by venture capital from the US and Europe, and then used to target journalists and activists by authoritarian countries.
Thank you, Eva. I would like to turn back to Etienne. Etienne, Amnesty has developed a range of fruitful collaborations with several organizations from the journalism industry, academia, and civil society Can you detail us the importance of such collaborations and what work has yet to be done? How were the recent cases revealed?
I mean, there is now a quite wide range of different organizations working on digital rights, digital security, and everything in between. And collaboration have always been there in human rights, in digital security, but now there are more and more collaboration, and we see very useful, and we've been collaborating with different organizations to do more research, do better digital security. And I think it's very important that every organization is finding their way of like how they can help there. So for instance, we've been relying on the great work done on digital security by EFF and the Security Self-Defense Guide. Other organizations are more focused on digital security, and we've been helping them getting better at tackling the question of spyware, while at the same time we've been, for instance, with some of the organizations focusing more on research. And all that pipeline going from supporting journalists to researching to advocating to doing campaign and trying to change the law and the different regulation there is really the core of trying to find the best coalition to do that.
And what are the mechanisms that journalists can use to secure their sources, secure their communications?
So there are many different things that are useful for journalists. I think, I mean, as of today, if you're a journalist, you need to have some form of digital security knowledge. You need to know how to have strong password, to use two-factor authentication, how to use signal another, and to an encrypted chat applications. You need to have some of this knowledge, but also you need to be, hopefully you can be in contact with organizations who can support you. So it's very important that the moment you face a specific threat, the moment you have very, for instance, very at-risk scenario, and you need to be sure that you have support and technical experts who can help you with that. A lot of major media now have security experts who can help with that. But for freelance journalists and journalists who are part of smaller media, there is now a network of organizations who can provide this kind of digital security support. So that's a first answer for journalists. If we speak specifically about the different kind of threat we have seen on spyware like Pegasus, as Eva was mentioning, these threats are very dangerous because in many cases there is no interaction with the victim. So it means that you can be compromised without any way of knowing it, and also without any way to do something against it. And so we have some ways to limit the damage with Pegasus, or to avoid that if you're at risk of Pegasus, or avoid the bad consequences. But it means that specifically for that, we need to find legal and political solutions. And so that's why any form of research and digital security has to go hand in hand with advocacy and work on regulation, so that we can limit legally the threat that journalists face.
Thank you so much, Etienne. And regarding the journalists needing to have access to these organizations that provide digital security or support in terms of digital security, how many applications, if it is possible to know, Amnesty has received from journalists concerning their worries regarding surveillance?
So I don't have an exact number, but I think, as you said, one thing we have been doing, and a lot of organizations have been doing, is sharing knowledge. And so I feel there were a lot of concern last year after the Pegasus project, and a lot of journalists were worried and reached out to different organizations. And Amnesty and a lot of those organizations have done a great work at collaborating to answer that in a way that is consistent, that is supportive, and that journalists find the best answer depending on the threat they face and depending on where they are. So I think overall, between the different partners we have, I'm sure there have been like thousands of journalists who were legitimately worried, and some of them even found that they were targeted. But this has not been like a one organization work. It has been really a coalition and a collaborative work to make sure that journalists find an answer in the network they're connected with.
Thank you, Etienne. And again, I'm turning back to Eva. Eva, has EFF also been receiving any applications from journalists or civil society actors concerning their digital security with regards to surveillance? And how can individuals guard themselves against surveillance from your point of view?
Well, I would start by taking a look at EFF's surveillance self-defense, which you can get to at www.eff.org, specifically at ssd.eff.org. Where we talk a lot about the sort of threat model that journalists have and what kind of skills and tools they need in order to defend themselves. SSD does not spend a lot of time specifically talking about how to protect yourself against zero-click ODAs targeting your phone. Because that hasn't really been the primary area of expertise or the particular problem that SSD is trying to solve. Because there are so many organizations that are doing really good and direct work on the ground with people who think that they are being spied on. And that includes Citizen Lab and Amnesty International. We do occasionally do this work when people come to us, and occasionally I do this work when I'm doing a digital security training for journalists, because often the journalists will come to the person that essentially has already offered themselves up as an expert in digital security and somebody that they trust.
Thank you, Eva. And my next two questions will be for both of you. That's why I would like to have both of you on the screen. So Hungary and Greece and many other countries where we have seen cases where journalists have been under government surveillance. But there have also been discussion and debate concerning mass surveillance for long years. Is there, in your opinion, is there a specific difference between these two concepts? Are they both equally harmful, or is one worse than the other one? What do you think about this situation, this comparison? Eva, shall we start with you?
Well, I spent many years thinking about the difference between mass surveillance and targeted surveillance. In fact, EFF helped to put together the 13 principles on the application of human rights to mass surveillance, and essentially it comes down to the fact that mass surveillance is always a violation of people's human right to privacy, because people have a right to privacy to default. And if you look at everyone's data, then you are not checking to see whether or not you have good cause, which is really an essential concept at the heart of privacy. Targeted surveillance is a little bit more complicated, because if you're not allowing mass surveillance, then a world in which we have agreed that we're going to have states, and the states will have some sort of security or law enforcement apparatus, their other option for gathering data is targeted surveillance. Targeted surveillance needs to be very carefully balanced. If we are going to turn the eye of the state onto somebody's digital life, which is an extremely powerful thing, the government needs to be able to come to a court and prove to a judge that this is absolutely necessary. There are many countries in which asking the government to come and prove to a judge that it's necessary for them to go spy on activists and journalists is child's play, because the purpose of the state is not a sort of rule of law with human rights considerations at its center, but rule by law, where the whole point of the state is for the people running the state to continue to protect their own interests and to continue to protect power. And the work of journalists is directly opposed to that very task, which is why journalists are often on the front lines of being threatened and surveilled. And the people who are doing the best work are often the people who are in the most danger.
And Etienne, what's your take on this? And Amnesty has been offering quite a bit of support for journalists and human rights defenders for a long time. And I would like to hear your opinion on this differentiation too.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with Eva. I'm going to repeat most of it. I don't know if we can say one is worse than the other. I think both are problematic in different ways. And what is true is that there have been a lot of work done to have tools especially over the past 10 years, to have more tools who can protect journalists. And we've seen, for instance, one of them is having end-to-end encrypted applications. And so a lot of ways for the state to do mass surveillance that could specifically have gather some data. People who are like journalists have ways to protect themselves. And in that context, we have seen development of the spyware industry to and saying intentionally we cannot gather data about people because of this application, which is amazing for journalists. The problem is, like now, as Eva was saying, the rule of law is you can, in very specifically context, in specific cases, you can be allowed to target people, and the human rights law says this in specific contexts, such as terrorism and so on, with a legal framework in the country. But what we see now is that these products, which are sold officially to fight against terrorism, are largely used against journalists over the world, journalists, activists, people in the opposition. And so this whole industry, which is pretending to protect people, which is pretending to fight against terrorism, is actually enabling governments to attack journalists and fight against a free press. And I think that's a major threat there is today. And that's also why we have to work with like digital security, of course, but we have to work with better regulation. And we see some states more and more pushing for that. There is this new investigation at the European level. We have seen some countries taking a stronger and stronger position against the spyware industry, and we need to make sure that we end up with a strong regulation so that a country cannot just buy spyware like Pegasus and attack a journalist without fearing any consequences.
And recently, the European Parliament actually held a session to listen to some experts concerning spyware technologies. And later on, they also announced that there's going to be established a committee to investigate further in this regard. And these are good developments, but what are also some requirements for the future of this field? What kind of research and advocacy action do you think there is needed for political changes against this kind of surveillance?
I think that there are a couple of really fruitful ways forward. Because I work for an impact litigation organization, I, of course, believe deeply in the power of lawsuits. And I am very excited to see EFF's lawsuit against Dark Matter moving forward. I have enjoyed watching Meta/Facebook/WhatsApp launch lawsuits against spyware companies, including NSO Group. Apple has sued surveillance companies, and I think that bringing the tremendous power of big tech lawyers up against some of these companies may prove to be a very significant consequence. I also think it's really important to hit these companies where it hurts, and the place where these companies can be hurt is their wallets. To go after their funding, go after and expose the venture capitalists that are enabling these kinds of human rights abuses, and let them know that this is what their money is buying.
Thank you, Eva. Etienne.
Yeah, I totally agree on both of these things. And on the litigation, there are today many people who were victim of Pegasus who have started litigation in a lot of countries, including France or India or Azerbaijan. And so we're looking forward to see how effective that would be. Clearly, speaking with investors is a good point. We are also, and with a lot of other organizations, Amnesty is calling for a moratorium on the use, sale, and transfer of this technology until there is regulation. So the situation is, we're in a situation where these spyware are used every day to target journalists, and there is no regulation that's working today. And so a moratorium means we ask to completely ban this industry until there is an international regulation. And that will require some work, but we won't be able to have a situation where we can have spyware like this that are not abused until there is not agreement in different way between, internationally, but also regionally and nationally. And we're working toward that. There are huge advancements, a lot of interest in a lot of places. So we need to continue pushing for this massive change internationally, so that at some point we may say, okay, it's okay now to sell spyware because we know that the recommendation is there to make sure that it's only used in the very specific case it should be used for.
Thank you. And also, this reminds me, when we talk about regulation and legal framework, almost every country that has conducted or that has been involved in targeted surveillance against journalists, the officials from their governments, they have been defending their moves by saying that this is completely legal, that it exists as part of either a national security law or a similar one that is the equivalent of a national security law. And they always justify these actions against journalists in a similar fashion. Do you believe that international regulation, or as some people have proposed it, have been proposing it in recent years, a Geneva Convention on Internet rights, would this be a step that can curtail this kind of action?
I think so there are different mechanisms. For sure, the question is, authorities in a lot of countries have been abusing surveillance for a while, and they are going to continue. The question is, how much pressure can we put to make sure that we limit that, and which tool are available to them? So there are different legal tools you can use, and all of them so far have been quite ineffective. For instance, export control is one. We have tried to, we've made legal case in Israel asking the Ministry of Defense to stop the export license to NSO Group because of the human rights abuses that didn't work. So you have a lot of boxes of tools that can be used, and they have all failed today. The question is, how do we transform that? I think maybe a Geneva Convention would be the form. I think there is a lot of work to be done to exactly find what mechanism will be more effective and how to define that. We need to make sure that there is enough political momentum and enough pressure by a lot of parties to make this international agreement happening. Whether that will be under the form of a Geneva Convention or another agreement, it's still to be defined, and there are a lot of discussion about that. But we need to make sure that we do not go back to a normal state, especially as there are more and more questions about whether NSO Group will just stop as a company because of the different legal issues they have. But if they do, we need to make sure that we consider the problem is about the industry and not about a single company or even a single country.
Thank you, Etienne. Eva, is there anything you would like to add to this?
I think it's really important that we do not continue to play whack-a-mole with the security, with the surveillance industry. That we don't simply move from killing some companies in Europe to maybe killing some companies in Israel to having to kill some companies in the UAE. We definitely need a more holistic approach. And I think that it's possible that regulation is the way forward and that a global framework is the way forward, but it is a very long road. There's still a lot of work to do, and so far all of our attempts at a regulatory framework have failed, which is one of the reasons why I am very hopeful and excited about some of the other things that we are doing. Having said that, I'm hesitant to dismiss any method of going forward. This is a very serious global problem, and all of the different ways of moving forward in order to find a solution are valid and worth pursuing.
Thank you so much. Thank you, both of you, for participating in our special episode on World Press Freedom Day, and thank you for joining us on this special occasion. And I hope we get to see positive development in this field. And I do hope that journalists will be able to operate in a free environment to supply accurate, reliable, and verified information to the people's right to access information.
Thank you for joining us for the World Press Freedom Day 2022, Journalism Under Surveillance. As we conclude our webinar, we would like to also share with you the news of the Investigative Journalism for You World Press Freedom Day special podcast.